Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Pukajay Productions Immaculate video. Today, we're going to be interviewing and catching up with our friend and author, Brien Foerster, who you probably know from shows such as Ancient Aliens and his work examining elongated skulls of the world, but Peru and Paracas in particular, and also his work examining, finding, and sharing megalithic structures in Meso and South America.
Indeed. He's also been the subject of the last video that we published, which is just kind of a striking while the iron was hot. That interview was 2 years ago, so it's almost to the day, actually. We've caught up with Brien again on Skype. He was nice enough to give us a piece of his time, and we hope you enjoy. All right, so I'd like to bring in Brien Foerster, a special guest on our discussions today. I've known Brien for a few years. I first met him in 2013 on the Graham Hancock tour that he was running down in Peru and Bolivia. Luke and I both talked to him again in 2015. We just released our full interview on YouTube from that. Brien's an author, he's a researcher, he's a tour organizer and a host along with his wife Irene. There's lots of details there's some of his books. He's lots of details on his books, his tours, his activities I think it's www.hiddenincatours.com. And thanks for joining us, Brien. I really appreciate you spending some time with us.
Good morning.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, slightly afternoon. I know you're coming to us from Paracas in Peru, where we're both over here in California, so miracles of technology and all. This is great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how have you been, Brien? It's been a couple of years almost since we've seen you, and the last we talked to you, you were working on testing some DNA for some skulls and other exciting stuff, and we just kind of wanted to catch up on how that's been going.
Well, 2 years is a long time. Actually, yeah, finally, the process of doing the testing of the Paracas skulls has taken 5 years.
Yeah.
And we're finally going to have a press conference in February with the results of at least 30, possibly 40 samples. I've been kept actually in the dark because I'm doing it with a group of people, and they know very well that if they leak the results to me early, I'll broadcast it all over the internet. So that's why we've decided to do it as a group. I think there's 7 participants involved, including archaeologists, 1 physician, even a human anatomy specialist, and also Eli Marzulli, who's more or less been in charge because he's been able to finance this whole process, which has been expensive and bureaucratic, but we're almost there.
It's great. I mean, it's for we talked to a lot of people that are fascinated by the elongated skulls that you find down in that region, and I know there's been a lot of mystery about it. I mean, I just watched you had an update, I think, from May 2017 on your channel, talking about how you were getting the DNA done, testing. You had, I think, 3 or 4 labs that were actually working with you now. So it sounds like you're getting somewhere with that, and there are results pending, if you like, in another month or 2.
Yeah, it's a very complex process, and what people don't understand is it's not like you having your DNA tested,
right?
Because you're a living being. These people died out 2,000 years ago, and so their DNA is infected with bacteria. Over the course of time of 2,000 years, the DNA breaks down into tiny little fragments.
Right.
So there are only 10 laboratories in the world that can properly do this analysis, and we have 2 of the best, and of course that comes with a price, but 2 of the best involved, and the results came in, I think, about a month ago. But then, of course, the next process before publication to the public is that we had to have an archaeologist do a technical paper, which will be sent out to it won't necessarily be peer reviewed, but it'll be sent out to any interested parties. We don't think we have to go through a peer review process because this has never been done before. But if archaeologists are interested, of course, they will be sent a copy.
That's great. Go ahead, Luke.
Sorry, Ben. Do these labs, do they know what they're testing? Have you?
No.
So you just sort of randomly, we have something we'd like you to test and let us know what it is.
Yeah, well, stupidly, what we did the first time is we sent them photographs of the skulls and told them the location.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what scared away 7 of the top 10 labs because they looked at the elongated skulls and said, we're not going to get involved with this. So the 2 labs we have, one's in Canada, one's in the US, they were simply sent samples and that was it, like sample A, sample B. And so that makes it a double-blind study, which is the way you're supposed to do it.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about this as well when we were, and this is another topic I want to get into in terms of the laboratories testing things like stone and cosmic radiation exposure and stuff. That if they get the idea that they're upsetting that orthodox apple cart, they tend to sort of shy away from that and not want to create those ripples and waves, right? And that seems to be a problem that happens a lot for anyone working, and particularly you in this space.
No, that's very true. You think that science is all about learning new things,
Right.
but there are paradigms that are set up, and like the history of Egypt only goes back to 3100 BC, and
Right.
that's it. Until you do what you've done, what I do, what other people have done, is actually apply scientific rigor to it.
Right.
And that, of course, is where Robert Schoch is one of the stars, where he's proven that the weathering of the Sphinx had to be rainfall that had to be 10,000 plus years ago.
Right.
So that blows their whole story. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that we're trying to expose to. I mean, and we're working on more content in that direction. There's just so many contradictions in that overall story, and people tend to forget a little bit that you've got these hard sciences like maths and physics and chemistry where you can do direct experiments and get a result. Versus things like history and archaeology, which is an interpretation of stuff that we find on the ground, and effectively you're being told a story which is put together by these guys based on, we've got these writings, we've got this stuff on the ground, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's all true, and there's certainly plenty of holes in it and contradictions to that whole thing.
Well, definitely the more you study history, the more you find that it's just, we've sort of cobbled together a picture based on tiny little pieces of information that we've extrapolated, like kind of a lot of guesswork around, and that seems to be what everything's really based on.
Yeah, and also ignoring local tradition.
Right.
You know the classic case in Egypt where Abdel Hakim Al-Rian, who was an absolute expert, who started his study when he was something like 6 years old, was never consulted by archaeologists or Egyptologists. And you get the same thing in Peru. Like none of the archaeologists or academics will consult with descendants of the Inca about their actual history.
Yeah,
Right.
it's bizarre. I mean, that indigenous knowledge it's a real thing, and we can point to things like modern medicine as tracing most of its roots from indigenous knowledge, the shamans in the jungle. I mean, everything that's an anesthetic comes out of curare and those things that are mixed, and it's knowledge that we effectively have stolen from indigenous people around the world. So there's a lot of truth in those things, and I mean, there's lots of work. You've done some work. Guys like Graham Hancock have done work that tie together all of the legends and the indigenous stories that now show that there's a great deal of truth in that, given that there's more and more scientific awareness that the Earth has been through these recent cataclysms. We've had massive changes in climate and sea levels and things like that would have wiped out older civilizations, and they're the stories that we hear from these indigenous cultures. So
It is. I think it's quite insulting for the indigenous people, because we come in, we dismiss everything, and then we dig stuff up and we make up stories. Just when I was researching the pyramid they attribute to Djedefre at Abu Rawash, it's very funny. It's just like the other pyramids. They found some statues in a pit, so that became his pyramid, because there's some statues in a pit. And then they found a statue of Menkaura at the site. So there's this story about how Menkaura did repairs to the pyramid, even though this would have been his uncle so the pyramid would only just have been built. But now there's a story that Menkaura repaired the pyramid, but there's no repairs, there's no evidence of any of that. It's just they found a statue in a pit, so they made up a story to go with the statue of the pit. But that's what they teach people, and it's not until you go and look to see, well, where did this story come from, that you realize it's not true.
Yeah.
There's no actual basis for it.
No, that's a great point. And the basic idea that possibly the Great Pyramid was built first, and then the second pyramid was built because both of those pharaohs had lots of money, and then by the time you get to Menkaure, well, he's not that wealthy, so he had to build a smaller one. It's not based on fact.
Yeah. Yeah,
Doesn't make any sense.
How do we make this fit this square peg fit the round hole that we've shaped in the ground with this story, right? So, but let me ask you another question about before we move on from the elongated skulls. Something that I was fascinated by. I was with you. You first exposed me to these things. I had no idea about them back in 2013. But it's not just the skulls, right? People recognise that there's a different shaped skull, but there's also some. Isn't there? What else is strange about the remains of these people? Don't they have? In terms of dimensions and skeletons, are there other sort of odd things that go along with these remains we find with the skulls?
Well, these people seem to have averaged about 6 feet or 5'10" to 6 feet tall, which is extraordinarily tall for local people here. If you compare them with the Nazca were 5'3", 5'4". Of course, you also have the genetic red hair, which has been proven only among the royalty, with elongated skulls. Other anatomical differences, the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters your skull, is much farther back than normal. So that would mean that at least some of the elongated skull people were born with elongated skulls, because that would have been evolutionary adaptation. And breaking news for you guys, I've only told this to one other person. There's an American author called Will Hart who's been studying...
Will Hart.
Oh, you do?
Not personally. I know who he is.
Okay, well, he's been studying blood type anomalies, because before there was DNA testing, academics would study the blood types of different people to see if there were differences from normal. And 10 Paracas mummies were sampled because some of the Paracas skulls still have tissue on them because of perfect preservation here in the desert. I actually took some samples today to go to a lab of tissue. Will was able to find documentation that 10 Paracas mummies, who would be at least 2,000 years old, that they were able to do blood analysis of them. And the basic story is that all native people from Mexico south to Patagonia, which is the southern tip of South America, 100% of them had blood type O. So that means a very homogeneous group of people, all coming from, crossing the land bridge of Siberia 12 to 15,000 years ago or whatever.
Yep.
But with the 10 samples of the Paracas, the study was published maybe 30, 40 years ago, and then was immediately hushed up, because when other academics found out the results, they told these guys, pull the paper.
Yeah.
So I can tell you what those results are. And of the 10 mummies, 43% were blood type O.
Okay.
28.5% were blood type A. 7.1% blood type B, and 21.4% blood type AB, which is the rarest blood type on the planet.
That's
Only
right.
3% of the population have that.
Wow.
So that by itself is telling you that they had a much more complex genealogy than simply being native people on the coast of Peru that decided to bind their baby skulls.
Now what is the cranial capacity like in comparison with normal sapiens? Is it the same cc amount, or is it larger? Do we know?
Yeah, in some cases it's 25%, but the problem is the skulls I have access to in the Paracas Museum, there has been no advancement of their number for about 2 years since Senior Juan Navarro, who ran the museum, since he died. The museum is basically static now. So what I would need is access to other elongated skulls, which is part of the reason I live in Paracas, because these things do show up once in a while.
Yeah.
But we have found anomalies of as much as 25% greater cranial capacity than a normal person of this area.
And to be clear, that is not possible to achieve with any kind of head binding, or like when you alter the shape of an existing skull, you cannot increase the cranial capacity. Is that correct?
No, that's correct, because the body is pre-programmed in terms of its completion. So a newborn baby has a very cartilaginous skull because that's how the baby comes out of the mother's birth canal, and it has to be
Right.
flexible. Excuse me. But in the course of about 2.5 years, the plates naturally are programmed to grow to meet each other and
Right.
create the suture. So if you change the shape, the process of those plates moving is not altered in terms of you can't stretch it in order to make them slow down
Right.
Right.
and produce more bone.
And
And
just
did they
adjust
have
the size. Yeah.
do they have the same suture marks on the skull as what we would consider normal or standard human skulls, or are they different?
No, they're different. That's another anomaly in that we have a suture that runs this way, and then a
Right.
suture that runs across that way, and then you have the occipital, which is back here. So that's what as far as I know, that's what every living human being looks like. But with the royal Paracas, this suture is either missing or it's fused within the first 3 years, and that's medically impossible.
So let me just go back to what you were saying about the blood types, because I think that's a fairly astonishing discovery. So what it points to is, if given that we think that everybody in that from Mexico down to Patagonia has an O blood type, and now there's evidence, I think what you said from like 40 years ago, of a study done on a blood work study done on these mummies that suggests that there's up to 50% or thereabouts of different types of blood types, including AB. That also points, isn't that very similar to, I mean, some of the DNA work you've already done is point to European genome types as being present in the DNA testing of some of these skulls. I mean, all of this, to analyze it all, if you like, and try and pull a conclusion out of it, it all points to a much more mixed history, right? It's in that the origins of civilization and of people that were in that space. It almost looks like they've come either from other parts of Earth, or we might actually be dealing with, and this is jumping just a shot in the dark in terms of conclusions, but given that we found things like Homo floresiensis, new types of subspecies of Homo sapiens, it seems like it's quite possible we might be dealing with another type of human, or some type of human species that we haven't yet categorized or found. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's what we're moving towards. The blood study by itself, like 10 samples it's a pretty good sample size. 100 would be better, but that's why I've taken some samples now to be to be tested, and that'll be an ongoing future project.
Right.
But yeah, it's when the Homo florensis showed up, immediately the results were scoffed at until more data was presented, and then they had to go, oh, okay. The same thing with Denisovin. It's like, oh, it's a fake, and then, oh, maybe, and then that's what you have to keep doing. You have to keep presenting more and more data, and eventually they have to accept it. They can't really ignore it because we have the internet and access to 7 billion people. So that's also the reason why peer reviews are no longer necessary, because that's often a closed group of people.
Right.
And so what I'm presenting is to the general public of the planet, not to some group of academics somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
Can I ask you, Brien? Now, the Mayans, because a lot of people don't know. They assume that Teotihuacan is Aztec or Mayan or something like that, but we actually don't know who built Teotihuacan, among other places. We just have no idea who built it. It was already there in the oral histories and the traditions of the indigenous people. So looking at how Mayans liked to bind skulls, and they really had this thing about how the big noses were super attractive, and sometimes they would file their teeth, and they also seemed to think that being at least mildly cross-eyed was a very kind of attractive thing or thing to be emulated. And I'm just wondering, does it seem like, is this something, do you think, that just happened like in today's society, like the most attractive thing is like a 5'9" supermodel that weighs like 90 pounds, and somehow that's become attractive? Or do you think that they were modeling themselves on something that they thought was superior and had a larger sort of skull and maybe large noses and things of that effect?
Yeah, I think so. Again, if you get into the oral tradition, in terms of cranial deformation, it's not something isolated to Paracas or even Peru or even South America. I've developed it. There's a very specific pattern that I found in Peru and Bolivia, but the origin is unknown. But in general, when there are descendants of these ancient people who, for example, the Maya is another example of cranial deformation among the elites. When you're able to find descendants who still carry the oral tradition, they tend to say that the reason why cranial deformation was done was A, because they thought it was aesthetic, B, because they thought it would clearly differentiate the nobility from the common people. C, maybe it increased their children's intelligence. And D, that's what the ancestors looked like.
Yeah.
So it's the modeling after some ancient ancestor.
And the red hair, is it, do we know it's natural red hair? It's not something that occurs like over time, over thousands of years, that the pigmentation changes or some kind of dye. It's actually red hair.
Yeah, I've read two studies by two hair experts, and they looked at many samples of the Paracas hair, and both of them said this is natural in color. This is not the result of dyeing or or oxidation or anything like that. Also, the hair follicles are 30% thinner than native hair. It's wavy in shape. It's not straight. So those are three characteristics which are not Native American.
Do we have
And,
any indication also as to like facial hair, whether they were able to grow beards, things of that nature?
That's a great question. I haven't seen a mummy that has facial hair so far, but the problem is the biggest collection of Paracas skulls are located in a warehouse at the major Archaeology and Anthropology Museum in Lima, to which I've been given no access. They have 10,000 skulls in there, and I know they have hundreds of Paracas ones, but I'm still working on. I know the director of the museum in Lima. It's just we're going to have to slowly inch our way into convincing her that we deserve to get access. And I think maybe the DNA results, if she doesn't freak out,
Right.
will allow that door to be open, because hopefully they'll find this intriguing and not something that they'll try to cover up.
Yeah, and just to connect the dots for people there on the red hair and the beards. I mean, that's given that's obviously the origin for that. I think is European, right? But that's also how they have described Viracocha and some of their gods and his followers, right, as being flame-haired and having beards. Is that's how, and they're described as gods, right? That's how the legends pretty much from the north to the south, they talk about the plumed serpent and Viracocha as having red hair and potentially beards. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, red hair originates in the Middle East.
The Middle East, that's right.
So,
yeah, not.
So a recent study of Celtic people from Ireland found out that they can trace their ancestry back to the Middle East.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing. So the origin of that, and you still have populations in Afghanistan and Iraq and Iran of the indigenous people were in general red and blonde-haired and blue-eyed,
Right.
and those are the people that ISIS have been eradicating because they're not Muslims.
Yeah.
Right.
So when people think of the Middle East, they think of dark-skinned people with black hair and beards. Those are the Arabs.
That's right.
The older populations were
Redhead.
light-skinned people, and it's very likely that the Paracas had light skin too, because if you have red hair, genetically you tend to have lightish colored
I have
skin.
some Syrian friends here that are red-haired and blue-eyed. So.
The first time I went to Egypt, I was actually 6 years old, and my mom was working over there for 6 weeks. I got time off school. I was a kid, and some of the people that she was working with, someone offered, I think they were actually tomb robbers, grave robbers, but they offered for however much the baksheesh was to take us with them in the middle of the night and go see these tombs that they were looting. which to me as a kid was just like the most exciting thing I think I'd ever done. And it was somewhere out in the Valley of the Kings, Valley of the Queens, Valley of the Nobles area, somewhere around Luxor. And we went out in the middle of the night, and we went into these tombs, and there were still mummies in them. And I remember very, very clearly that they had red hair. They still had red hair. And
Wow.
and I actually cut some mummy cloth off of one of the mummies and brought it home. And my mom eventually threw it out because it smelled so bad that there was nowhere you could put it. But
Had humidity.
but yeah,
and stuff,
I'll never forget the red hair. I mean, they still had teeth as well, but just that the red hair really surprised me as a kid.
Wow.
Well, the same in the Cairo Museum. If you go into the
Mummy
two rooms that have mummies, you see blonde hair. And again, these two hair experts were emphatic in that black hair cannot oxidize to red. You can have red hair that goes blonde, but black hair is fixed.
Right.
Right.
And also, it seems like most of the iconography, or a lot of the iconography, both in Peru and Mesoamerica and in Egypt, you see the statues, they all have blue eyes. Like the gold statues, they all have blue eyes. I mean, it would be easy for them to make brown eyes, right? But they all
Sure.
have blue eyes.
No, that's a good point, and of course we don't want to go down the dangerous rabbit hole of the Aryans came and did all this kind of thing, but that's exactly what you see. You see that there are even like glass eyes in at least one or more statues in the Cairo Museum. I think one is of a scribe, and very complex glass eyes that were made that are very brilliant blue, and that had to have been done on purpose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole point, as you say, this isn't a. It's not. It's obviously you start talking about race. It can be a contentious issue, but all of these are. It's really just applying scientific rigor to show that there is a high likelihood now that our civilization and the roots of what we term as civilization, which is everything that's happened in the last 10,000 years, we have a much more complicated history. I mean, if you that really matches well, because since we last talked, I mean, they've made that discovery in Morocco that pushed back the earliest human remains to something like 450,000 years. There's been work done now on the human genome to determine that we split from a common ancestor with Neanderthals around 700,000 years ago. So it's quite likely that we've had humans like us walking around for anywhere between 700 to 400,000 years, yet our history only spans the last 10,000 years. So, and also you mix into that all the evidence of cataclysms and sea level changes and things that would have wiped out our civilization today. And, all of these things point to the fact that, well, we may have had a much more mixed history than we know. We may have had global civilizations, and we've been everywhere, and the roots of what we now call our civilization has come from the ashes of that one.
No, that's a good point, and also obviously very complex migration.
Right.
Often as the result of someone moving into your homeland and trying to exterminate you, so you have no choice but to leave, and that's why we're leaning towards the idea that the Paracas were possibly forced out of their homeland, and over the course of time they developed a very complex number of different blood groups because of mixing with other people.
In isolation.
As they moved along, they were mixing here, mixing there.
Yeah.
If you were a holdover too from a prior civilization, if there had been a cataclysm and things were slightly different, and then these sort of human creatures had, the sapiens had survived, and you're slightly different, but you can crossbreed.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that would perhaps go some way towards explaining that.
No, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, we're warlike buggers too. That's the other issue, right? That we're we definitely, just by evidence of our own history and civilization, we like to fight, and it's like you say, a good chance that we've pushed all of these other species into some form of extinction, or at least their numbers get small enough that they dwindle away. I mean, that's the way I think about a lot of these elongated skull people, that they may have been just pushed out by us, like Homo sapiens sapien. Like we're angry little warlike buggers, and
we don't like things that are different.
Yeah.
No, we like to kill everything, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and of course, supposedly the Florensis people were wiped out by us, and
Tiny.
Denisovan was probably wiped out by us, and Neanderthal was probably wiped out by us because we have this very nasty tendency of doing that.
Yeah, yeah, it hasn't stopped yet, unfortunately. We may not
Yeah,
be the
No,
end of the evolutionary chain on that one, I don't think.
I read an
true.
interesting study too on the Neanderthals about how their sort of social structure was actually quite complicated. And, the men actually stayed near the encampments with the children, and the women moved from group to group. So it's sort of to prevent inbreeding,
Yeah.
and then would leave the children, then move on to the next. And so it probably worked very well for them, but it was probably much slower than sort of our sapiens. We're probably a little looser, and we just probably out resourced and out procreated.
Yeah.
Them.
Right.
So while we're just on that, the scientific work, if you like, there's something else. I mean, other than the elongated skulls, the last time we talked, and this was 2015, you were saying that you had sent some samples from places like Tiwanaku of worked stone surfaces. So for people that haven't watched that, there is a way to try and date stone. It's a complex process. It involves trying to determine how long a worked surface has been exposed to cosmic radiation or just the sun. Which gives you a ballpark window of trying to age stone. Like people typically say, you can't age. You certainly can't age it with carbon dating. It isn't a carbon or an organic remain. But there is a way in laboratories to test some of this stone. And 2 years ago, you'd mentioned that you had been trying to get something going there. Has there been any progress on that front? I mean, I know you got stonewalled by a bunch of laboratories with that, but has there been any further developments in that?
No pun intended.
Space? Yeah,
Stonewall.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, no. That we did a crowdfunding thing and sent samples to one university, and then when they found out what the results were, they said, "Well, we're not going to,
Publish.
basically, we're not going to tell you what the results are."
Yeah.
And that was that. And then, then also a university in France, samples were sent to, and I think the director of the laboratory said, well, I can't send you the results, but I will return your money. And then I inquired, well, why is that? And he said, well, okay, we can send you the results, but you can't publish what lab it is. And I said, well, why is that? And then the final thing was, well, we can't tell you the results because they can't be different from the archaeological studies of the area.
Which says they are, yeah.
Which automatically tells you they found something that didn't fit. But unfortunately, that's kind of reached a dead end at this point. We're looking at a different technique called thermoluminescence, but that's only in its infancy right now.
Right.
Yeah.
What's interesting, Ben obviously went with you in 2013 to, through Peru and Bolivia, and we went again in 2015. But one of the things, so many amazing things, it's hard in some ways. Sometimes it's overwhelming, the amount of stuff you're presented with. But one of the things that's really stuck with me that I keep thinking about, and Ben and I have discussed this a few times, is that whoever built the Coricancha and did that stonework in there, you see almost exactly the same thing at Pumapunku. I mean, just exactly the same types of work and a lot of the same type of stone. And I think that's really significant because, as you know, the archaeologists tend to just assign everything to the Inca. But Pumapunku was never an Incan site, and they cannot attribute that to the Inca. So they try to sort of give that to the Aymara, who don't claim it. It's not part of their history. It was already there, according to them. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about those sites and how that fits in the picture? Because I keep going back to that. Like every time I look at all our pictures of Pumapunku and then I look at the Coricancha, I'm just like, this is obviously the same people. They're making the same type of blocks, not the H blocks obviously, but a lot of the stuff, especially that's in the courtyard, in this sort of dismantled area of the Coricancha, is identical to what you find lying around at Pumapunku.
Well, yeah, the Corey Conch is one of my favorite buildings. What we've been noticing lately is that resonance was very important in the way that it functioned, and the niches that are inside respond to the sound of ohm, which is interesting. Also, the we went to the quarry finally,
I saw the
which is
pictures.
called Rumi Kolka, which means the stone warehouse, and it's located 45 miles away. But not only that, because we spend part-time living in Cusco and work with local experts and wisdom keepers, we found out that mainly the original construction of Cusco itself, prior to the time of the Inca, almost all of the stone came from this one quarry called Rumi Kolka. And so when you walk the streets of Cusco and you see the megalithic works and remains that still exist, the Coricancha is in pretty good shape compared to many of the others, but it's believed that at least 1 million tons of basalt was moved from the quarry at Rumicolca to Cusco to construct it.
45
So,
miles.
yeah, 45 miles over very hilly terrain.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh, and of course, it's wet there 6 months of the year.
yeah.
There are no indigenous trees that grow straight. But when you come to Pumapunku is the most bizarre place
It
there
is.
is. I've been there uh, 55 times, I think now.
Wow.
Just there last month, and every time I go, there's a new revelation. And this is going to sound pretty wild, but for the last couple of years, I've been measuring magnetism because there are a lot of
Yeah.
very strange
Mm.
magnetic anomalies there. But the latest thing was, and it's one of those things where you think maybe you won't learn more about the place, but the place always has more to tell you if you look. So when we were at the Acapana, which is the seven-layered pyramid made out of, or pyramidal structure made out of red sandstone, that quarry is about 9 miles away. Um, the bottom layer of the seven is heavily eroded, but the upper sections aren't. And when you really look at it, it looks like water erosion, as if it had been sitting in a pool of water.
Right.
So when you look at the time frame, about 12,000 years ago, Lake Titicaca, 12 to 15,000 years ago, Lake Titicaca was about 100 feet higher than where it is now. And so that accounts for the massive staircase that you find at the northern edge of Pumapunku. It's like that's where the lake was.
Right.
You would come by boat or something, and then you would walk this megalithic staircase up. And so when I was at the Acapana, which is nearby, and I look at this water erosion, then I look to my right to the Kalasasaya pyramid, or Kalasasaya courtyard.
Yep.
Again, there are these huge vertical stones of andesite, which comes from 45 miles away. And the water erosion is at the same level as at the Acapana. So if you raise the level of the lake by 100 feet, the Acapana would have been a little island. And then the Kalasasaya, I don't know what it was, but it literally looks like waves created the erosion. So that could honestly date Pumapunku and Tiwanaku at being more than 12,000 years old.
Yeah.
When we
I
were there,
believe
we
it.
had an indigenous guide who I think we introduced you to. She has her
Rosemary?
house, Rosemary. She
Yeah,
lives
yeah,
right.
she's wonderful.
She's
Yeah.
lovely. And
Yeah,
she
she's
was
wonderful.
when we were there, she gave us the sort of official archaeological dates. And I said, but how old in the indigenous history is this site? And she's 14,000 years old. She was very clear. It's 14,000 years old. And that site, Pumapunku, is clearly destroyed by some kind of massive flood, water, some kind of event that had to do with water, because everything is strewn everywhere. It's buried in mud that has then solidified. And so what happened at, 14,000 feet?
It's
at
it's
however
30
long
and a half,
ago.
right? It's up in the air.
Yeah.
It's way up
Yeah.
in the air. It's
Yeah, it is.
that would make, I mean, to me, and remember, for water erosion, you have to have the construction in the water for like a couple thousand years to show that. So we know when the lake
Right.
receded, so it had to be there before that for however long to make that
There's a
happen.
lot of water
And that
erosion
place.
around the base of Egyptian pyramids too that I've noticed.
Oh
Yeah, that's yeah. We're going back in March, and that's something I'm going to look at again.
You know, if you get to go to Abu Wash, or if you're there an extra day, see if you can get to go to Abu Wash. When I went up there, that's at a raised elevation. Like the base of that pyramid is pretty much
Higher.
almost on a par with the peak of the Great Pyramid and the Second Pyramid, which you can see off in the distance. And the ground is absolutely littered with seashells. I mean, they're just everywhere.
Hmm.
And it's so much higher than even the Giza Plateau. Just wondering where did all these seashells come from? At what point was, their ocean here?
Hmm.
Well, we know some of that in terms of what was ancient lake beds and things, but the erosion and the damage as well on these sites is a question to me. See, and this was a question I had for you actually, which is there's to me, and I there's just been another paper studied and peer reviewed. It was published in Nature that looked at the microspherules from impact events that they found in these fossilized bison and mammoth skulls up in the Yukon. That all of this indicates, like, so there's a whole host of papers and sort of mainstream science now that suggests that there was a massive cataclysmic event right at the end of the last ice age called the Younger Dryas Boundary. We've talked about it a bunch, but that's what caused massive climate change, and a lot of the evidence points towards it being, periods of bombardments from space, in terms of comets and asteroids. We know that there was a big event, that there was this cataclysmic event. Lots of stuff is showing that now. What I notice in South America, and particularly places like Sacsayhuaman, also there's a great example of it at Machu Picchu, is the damage that has happened to these sites. Some of them are just in disarray, like that there's stuff's been moved around and tossed here and there, and there's a big part of Machu Picchu, the wall that's leaning over. It's typically not something you see in many megalithic sites. You've been to these places many times. Do you think there's a correlation between that of, like, as if these megalithic things were standing there when this cataclysm happened, or do you think all of this damage came from more localized events like earthquakes? I say earthquakes, they're disasters, but this cataclysm that happened 12,500 years ago was a truly global cataclysm. Do you think we're looking at damage from that, or just what's happened over time since then?
Well, every megalithic site that I know of in the Cusco area, and at Lake Titicaca, at Silustani and other places, you see that the damage is basically east to west.
Yeah.
So the walls of the Chulpa towers at Silustani are blown out on the western side, and then the Coricancha, the Coricancha shows a lot of damage that would have been an earthquake of 9.5 or something like that. Machu Picchu as well, the damage is east to west. So you see that pattern going on. So I think it wasn't simply a localized cataclysm. I think it was an aspect of the global cataclysm. That's something we're going to look more at too when we go back to Egypt in March. And have you guys been to the site called Tanis?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we went there with Yusuf and Mohammed. That site blew our minds. That place, and you can imagine it went for kilometers. Like it went for kilometers at some point, and yeah, unbelievable place.
Yeah, and basically no plants grow there.
Right.
It's like, whoa, that place is amazing.
It is.
I was actually very lucky there. I found a small pottery piece, Eye of Ra, in a rubble pile that still had blue paint on it.
Wow.
And yeah, the tour guide we were with said, "Oh yeah, just don't, just put it in your pocket." So
could have been a concession stand in the last 50 years, but
I was very excited actually about this. One of my prized possessions. But yeah, Tanis was an amazing site, and again, it's just examples of that sort of conglomerate stonework where they're using this conglomerate stone that's made out of all these different kinds of stones of different hardness, and they're just cutting right around that and writing into that I'll use this incredibly difficult piece of stone that nobody in their right mind would use. Yeah, sure, I'll make a pillar out of that.
Well, also luckily we were there with geologist Susan Moore, who's been with us 5 times in a row, and the quartzite statues there.
Yeah.
looked at the toes on one foot, and I said, "Is
You're
that
right.
melted?" And she said, "Yeah, it looks like it."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we did. I'm not sure if you had a chance to see it, but Yusuf gave us that demonstration with the electromagnetic induction machine,
Yeah, I
and
saw
then
that. That's
comparing
cool.
those results with what we see on those limestone walls that are backed into basalt, and you've got that flaky melted effect that happens to some of that stone. I think there's a lot of work and a lot of actual science that we could apply there if people had an open enough mind to actually consider the possibility. I mean, that to me is that's what we've got to
Tannis,
do.
yeah.
It's people have to open their minds, and then
Tannis
we can apply
also,
science.
it also had the same basalt, the machined floors, had those basalt floors that had those
Right.
machined surfaces like you see at Abu Sir. It like
Right.
exactly the same.
And
Exactly
No,
the same.
exactly.
for people that may have heard of Tannis as well, we were trying to find the map room that Indiana
Yeah.
Jones found, but
Staff was a little bit
the
long.
staff was a little too long for our thing. So Tannis is a big site. It actually takes a few hours to get there from Cairo, but it's well worth the visit if you get to Egypt. I'd go with Brian's trip. I mean, these guys, hiddenincotours.com, you can
It's
touch
about
these sites.
4
It's
hour.
worth seeing.
It's about 4 hours in the car. We had a police escort. They ran their sirens most of
Oh,
the
yeah.
way, and they all had AK-47s. But they were they were really excited to see the site too. They were putting their guns down and taking pictures,
Yeah,
and
we
then
got
they
some
wanted us
selfies.
to hold their guns and take pictures. I'm like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
okay.
actually, the amazing thing is almost nobody goes to, like nobody was
Right.
at Tanis when we
Same.
were there, and it's just like, yeah, it's like it's surreal, that place.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the ways that they started excavating there again was through this satellite archaeology. There were a bunch of sites that this satellite archaeologist discovered. One of them was at Tanis, and this stuff was something like 6 to 8 inches under the ground that they could see from the satellite. And now there's a French team there has been there a couple years, excavating. So they may still find the map room. Who knows?
Yeah. There's some massive stuff at town. I mean, I remember
Oh,
just
yeah.
standing next to this foot, and the big toe of the foot
Yeah.
is like bigger than my head, and you can just imagine this. It was a seated figure. You could just imagine what this thing would have looked like, in its originality. There was some huge work done at Tanis. I think it rivals Luxor and that type of thing.
Actually, some even bigger, because
Yeah.
Susan Moore, again, who was with us, geologist from Canada, she and Patricia Aouillon wandered off, and they were able to see parts of two statues, because Susan had read an account from Flinders Petrie or somebody like that who had done, or Mariette or someone who had done some original excavations, and they calculated that there were, I think, two statues there that were at least 100 feet tall.
Wow. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So, so that's where the foot, you see
Yeah.
the foot and you go, oh, whoa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ben and I did a little research recently on both Abu Ruwash and another site that seems very, very similar to it that isn't talked about very much, called Zayat Al Aryan, which is actually on a military base and nobody has
Yeah.
been able to access for a very long time.
Mhm.
And we were able to find Barsanti's original notes on his discovery of the Zayat El Aryan site, and it was all in French on the Annales du Service de l'Égypte, and we had to translate it all from French to get
Painstakingly.
his
Notes.
account of this. But one of the things that he found, because he found the pit underneath where the pyramid would have been, and it looks just like Abu Ruwash, except it's a little bit larger.
Ah.
And there's many anomalies with this, but one of the things, he started excavating the pit and he thought it was just sand, and he got to like 9 meters down or something, and all of a sudden it was all these interlocking slabs of granite and limestone in a very Tetris-like, I mean, these blocks actually interlocked with each other, so that they had to break up a block and then sort of Tetris out the other blocks to get to. And every time he got down a layer, he thought it was the bottom,
blocks.
and it went down about as far as Zoser's pyramid shaft. It went down about 30 meters into the ground, and what he figured was the bottom layer. When they pulled that granite out, there were these massive granite stones on the floor
Perfectly
down there,
finished type.
perfectly finished and polished. And in one of them, there was an oval vat, or tank as he called it, which had a lid on it, which was still sealed with plaster and limestone. And he opened it. He was very excited because he thought It's unopened. Obviously, nobody's ever been in this before because look, it's under 30 meters of interlocking granite and
Find the
limestone.
mummy.
We're going to find the mummy. We're going to find the treasure. We're going to find whatever this is. So he opened it up, and this is oval. It was an oval. They call it a sarcophagus, but this is at least third dynasty. It's probably much, much older than that.
Yeah.
But third dynasty, they hadn't really solidified the sarcophagus thing yet.
Similar
so
in
anyway,
size
they found
to the
this,
Serapeum boxes, but just oval in
right?
shape.
Except that what it was cut into was a massive like
Granite
stone block in the ground.
Yeah.
And anyway, this thing was sealed. He opened it up. The only thing, it was empty. But what was inside it all the way around was a 10-centimeter ring of black residue.
Ooh.
Somewhere like halfway up it or something. It was at a level in this, he called it the tank or the vat. Yeah, and so he was disappointed, but that...
He was disappointed. I was blown away.
Yeah.
I was, this to me. So now, supposedly, maybe the same thing was found at Abu Ruwash. I don't know. There's a really conflicting report that we couldn't verify about. They found the same thing in Abu Ruwash, and there's just no real report of it anywhere. But it would make sense since it looks the same. So it's just another one of these things. They've gone to all this incredibly difficult work at some time in the very distant past to cover up a vat that was sealed with some kind of fluid or something in it that would leave a 10-centimeter black residue all around the edge. And now that's all filled in. It's filled in with junk. It's probably been quarried. That thing is like, who knows? No real studies of any of this stuff have ever been done. It's never really mentioned. Nobody talks about it. It's of no significance according to the archaeological community.
Yeah.
And to me, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, actually, the same thing we found in both at Saqqara and in the Valley of the Kings. We went into a recently opened, like Ramses the Sixth or something,
Right.
descending shaft thing that went for hundreds of feet, like hundreds and hundreds of feet.
Yeah.
Clearly done by a machine. And inside there was a box, like a giant box, like the Serapeum. But it had obviously been damaged by high heat or something, and there's this weird goo on the inside of it. And so again, I was there with Susan. Susan, come here, look at this, and what do you think that is? And she said, it looks like some kind of shellac. And I said, maybe that's what's left of the occupant. That's what it looks like.
Nice.
It looks like somebody was flash fried inside the thing.
Yeah,
when
it's
Christopher
all those
Dunn
things.
talks about like these things maybe being sound resonant, sorry Ben, being
You're
like
right.
sound resonant chambers and this other residue that was found on the walls. And I was watching some sound experiments recently where they're showing how low frequencies and what frequencies are really effective at like putting out fire, for example. And I'm thinking, what if these things were like resonant in that way so that when you had whatever chemical reaction going on inside the pyramid, normally it would want to catch fire. But if you had some kind of resonance going through that killed the fire, then you could sort of prolong that chemical reaction or whatever it is that you were looking to produce with.
Fire's just oxidization. It's just, if you can stop that with some frequency, right, that's... Yeah, I have the same question with all of this. I mean, we have these emergent scientific areas we know very little about. Telluric energy, which is these massive currents of energy flowing throughout the earth. There's piezoelectric properties of various types of stone. We see this at Napahuaca, also in Peru, but certainly in Egypt. It seems to me like these pits and these underground and the bottoms of the pyramids, it's like they somehow wanted to lock things into the earth, and I suspect it's... I'm absolutely convinced that these were functional in some way when they were originally intended. You don't build things as precise and big as the Serapeum for ceremonial purposes. You just don't have any reason to achieve that level of precision when you're trying to build a box to put a body in. But I just suspect if we had the open mind and to consider those aspects and we applied our scientific discipline and rigor to it, I think we could find some incredible things. But all it takes, it would take the establishment and the orthodox kind of maybe admitting that we don't know everything. We don't get to sit up on high and look down on all these other cultures and our past. We should open our mind and take the perspective that maybe they knew something we didn't, and we could learn something from these sites if we really opened up our mind and considered these possibilities, because that evidence just keeps piling up. I don't know what they were doing in Egypt. I can't really even speculate what it's for, like that entire Giza area, or the Sun Belt of pyramids. that may have been some huge functioning machine back in the day. It just, I can't, we forget that we're only looking at the tiny skeletal remains of what's left there after it's been pilfered and quarried for the last 2,000 years by everyone that had a camel and, a day's work in them to take some stone away. I mean, it's, I don't have an explanation for it, but I'm convinced that stuff wasn't ceremonial. Now, the dynastic Egyptians may well have used it, and I'm sure they did use it in those aspects. Like you say, Valley of the Kings with those long passageways, they're definitely tombs, but they were most likely repurposed as tombs. Plaster the walls over, write on them. I mean, to me, that's why you don't find anything in the pyramids, is because the ancient Egyptians weren't cracking into them either.
It's the same thing with Winese's pyramid. It's got those beautiful pyramid texts on there, but I believe those pyramid texts, they went down, they found those granite chambers, they plastered over them, and they wrote their hieroglyphic stories on the walls.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because it's another one of those incredible granite infrastructures at a time when they had no tools or ability supposedly to quarry granite, let alone move it 900 kilometers and make these incredible structures out of it.
No, that's very, very true. And I think most of the super ancient stuff is still there, but it's underground in the shafts and the tunnels. And so it's a question of getting access, and that's starting to happen because the new antiquities minister's opening places up, because it's like, we need more, finally, it's like we need more tourism. We need more for people to look at than simply the Giza Plateau and stuff like that. So access to the shaft and tunnel system through local people like Yusuf and Patricia Oyan is what is going to happen in the future. And it's up to us to make the discoveries. Waiting for these guys behind desks at universities, forget it.
Yeah, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at hopefully getting down into the Osiris Shaft and some of these new areas, because it seems like you can now get there, and we're looking at maybe the end of next year to do that. That's
great.
Yeah.
Well, it's the Osiris Shaft. It's another one of those things. You've got Serapeum type boxes that are larger than the shaft, and everything is bedrock. So
right.
How'd you get that stuff down there?
And these tunnels that disappear off into no one cares or knows. Like Zahid was down. He's like, they don't go anywhere. Don't worry about it. I'm like, that'd be nice to
let me just lock this gate so no one else figures out where it goes either.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sphinx Temple has the same thing. So, Brien, I got to say, I've actually really been enjoying your YouTube channel. You've got like 130k subs or more than that now on there, and you've been doing some like almost like some new sites that nobody's seen. Like a couple things that of note to me. One is that you went out and explored all these salt flats. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. But also there's like a megalithic wall, almost like a Hanan Pacha wall that's over near Peru in the lake, and you couldn't find it. The policeman didn't know where it was. You looked over here and saw it, and you took a group there to see it. And it's astonishing from what I saw of the footage. Is there any? I mean, you sound like you found a couple of places recently that are worth looking at if you get down to Peru.
Yeah, well, the salt flats in Bolivia are fascinating just because of the sense of scale.
Yeah.
The largest salt flat in the world. There's a volcano located that has some caves with elongated skulls in them. It takes 2 hours to drive from the hotel, like from the edge of the salt flats, to get to this volcano.
Wow.
Like 2 hours going 100 kilometers an hour
on a salt flat.
And it's a beautiful thing. There's some history to it, etc. It actually is. The salt was created again probably 12,000, 15,000 years ago, when Lake Titicaca was 10 times the size it is now, because it was a salt lake. The altiplano tilted upwards, all the water spilt down and created the salt flat. So it's really, it's a beautiful place to visit. But yeah, this 6 years ago, I started seeing photographs of this place near a village called Kenuani, and it's a series of staircases and ledges and stuff like that. And my friends who were the experts in Cusco and also Bolivia had no clue what I was talking about. So finally, we were able to find out within 2 kilometers of where it was, and we knew it was just over on the Bolivian side of the Peru-Bolivia border. So I was demanding that we do it on a certain day. So
Yep.
we crossed over the border, asked a local person. They said, I don't know what you're talking about, and kept driving along. And then Gustavo, who's our Bolivian guide expert, he stopped and went into a police station on the left-hand side of the road and came out 4 minutes later. And the policeman said, I don't know what you're talking about. Meanwhile, I was looking out at about the 1 o'clock position from the bus, and there I could see it in the background. So he said, well, he doesn't know where it is. And I said, I'm looking at it. So we actually drove to it. What I was hoping was that it was the quarry for Pumapunku,
Right.
because the quarry for Pumapunku is within like a kilometer or so of that location. But when we looked at it, you know, there's weird like spiral staircases and straight staircases, and it's how long? It's at least 1,000 feet long.
Wow.
In the middle of nowhere. Supposedly part of it's underwater in Lake Titicaca, and but the composition is it's compressed volcanic ash with some larger stones in it. So that's not the composition of the andesite. So we didn't find the quarry of Pumapunku on that day, but it's a place that nobody that I knew of had ever heard of. And you literally drive past it on the highway. It's not next to the highway, but now that I'm aware of where it is, I can go. There it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's amazing. So that's the. Also, we have a new guide for the Lake Titicaca area of the Peru side called Stephanie, who was literally descended from the High Inca.
Yeah.
She's very tall. She has very angular Inca features. She has dark red hair, and she's only 25, but her knowledge level is just off the charts. So definitely every tour we do in that area from now on, we're going to include her because she's just amazing level of knowledge based on the fact that her grandmother started teaching her when she was like 3 or 4 years old.
Cool. Yeah, there's that indigenous connection, right? That's where you find. I mean, along those lines, are you familiar? This is a question out of left field, but are you familiar with the Father Crespi story?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So this is for people that haven't looked it up. Google Father Crespi because he was a priest, I think, in Ecuador, somewhere like that, and he ran a small church, and he was in a small mountain town, and he helped out the popular. He lived there his whole life. He was an old guy. This all happened in the 70s and 80s. And people would come out of the jungle and they would give him artifacts, these incredible artifacts, including writing and what looks like some Egyptian artifacts. And there was 1 or 2 photographers that got in there Sumerian stuff that 1 or 2 photographers that got to go in there and photograph the stuff. But it's really sort of low quality photographs compared to what we can take today. And then unfortunately he passed away. And the Vatican sends a new priest out there, and within a few weeks he realizes what he's sitting on, and everything in that place gets shipped off back to the Vatican to never be seen again or heard about. But that's just an indication. I mean, I
actually read something recently
out there
that somebody actually went out and they found like a fair amount of that stuff was still there, and they said that the plates, sort of the iron plates and stuff, or the metal plates, kind of looked fake. But some of the other stuff looked pretty legitimate.
Yeah.
I'd have to look around for that. I did see that update on it. But yeah, if that stuff is real, it's an important connection because there's definite sort of Babylonian, Assyrian, and Egyptian similarities with the South American stuff.
Yeah, well, the basic story behind that though is that these local native people found some artifacts and took them to Father Crespi, and he gave them money for it because he was from a very wealthy Italian family. He actually, when he moved to Ecuador, he brought with him like master paintings from Europe, which he could then sell off if he wanted money, because he did most of he probably built his church and stuff because I don't think the Vatican wanted to give him any money for it. So he was very engaged with the local people. So it seems what happened is that the original pieces were real, and then they ran out of them. So they started manufacturing stuff, and then he kept buying it because he was sympathetic with the people. I think the important point about that, though, is that it's the so-called Tayo's Cave, But
Right.
Okay.
more recent investigations have found out, and people have gone to the Taos cave, but they haven't found anything. Supposedly, the new information is that they went to the wrong cave.
Yes,
Oh,
that's
right.
what I heard, that it's a different cave that people have become confused with what's
Yeah,
now called the Taos Cave.
the
Didn't
original name.
Klaus Dona end up with some of these pieces
Uh,
though?
I don't think so. He came up with some artifacts, but from what I've seen, they're nothing compared to the Sumerian stuff, like the guy who's got like a bird's head and he's holding a bag and that kind of thing.
Right.
But
Well, is that where
supposedly,
the pyramid though, with the eye on the top and the
I,
writing on
I
the bottom?
I
Is that
think
where
that's
that was? You think
I
that's
think
fake?
that's fake.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
the real name is the Tawas Cave,
Tawas.
and that makes sense because Tawas or Tawa is an Inca term, which means four. And that's where the last of the one of the last of the High Inca called Atahualpa lived in Ecuador, and was killed by the Spanish in northern Peru. But supposedly his whole family fortune was also hidden away in what's called the Tawas Cave, not the Tayos Cave. So it's yet to be rediscovered unless somebody has already plundered it.
Now we went to the Museo de Oro in Bolivia. It was actually open the day we went, so we
Hmm.
went in and we got to see the
Bowl.
Fuente Magna bowl,
Hmm.
and I actually was able to take a couple of sneaky photographs before the guard rushed in, and I acted very like confused. I didn't know what he was talking about, and he decided he'd mistaken my phone for my sunglasses, which I had like clipped to my shirt. And so we got out with a couple of sneaky photographs. But what's your feeling on the because for people who don't know, it has a lot of sort of Andean symbology, iconography on it, but the other half of the bowl has cuneiform, but it's like a mirror cuneiform. It's like backwards cuneiform on the bowl. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, it supposedly has Proto-Sumerian script on the inside. I actually went there with a medical doctor who's actually an expert in Proto-Sumerian, and he looked at it and he said, "Yeah, that's Proto-Sumerian." So that's an expert looking at it. The composition of the bowl, though, it seems to be sandstone, typical of the area because it was found on the eastern side of Lake Titicaca, on the Bolivian side, in a little village where the person who found it used it as uh, a vessel to feed his pigs, and
Of course, that's right.
then it wound up in the National Museum collection. So looking at I've become a reasonable expert on being able to look at the patina, which is the surface of a stone or ceramic bowl or container vessel, whatever, or metal tools too, because Senior Juan was able to educate me on how to distinguish a fake from a replica. Um, and so looking at it, the color of the carving and the color of the material appear to be the same. So that would indicate that all of it was done at the same time. But there were also Tiwanaku culture faces on the outside of it
Right.
too. So it seems to be a mix of Sumerian with Tiwanakan. So whether it came from another part of the world and then was carved extra on the surface like 1,000 years ago, I don't know. I find it difficult to believe that it's a fake, though. It's also been really badly repaired with
Yeah.
some kind of
Yeah.
almost like plastic wood or like clay or something was added to it. So I still don't know. If they find more artifacts in that area, then that of course will make it more important. But it's more or less the only artifact of its kind. So at the moment,
I thought it was very odd that it ended up there because almost
yeah,
everything else, there's like a couple other little statues in that room, but everything else in that museum is just gold or silver.
yeah,
So it was kind of interesting that it ended up there for whatever reason. But we were
yeah, and
fortunate because I gather it's closed a lot, that museum.
oh stupidly. And why can't you photograph a stone bowl?
I don't know.
Yeah, they're very precious about that, aren't they?
It's like, no. And yeah, there is of course you took the photographs because, you simply have the camera behind you, and you
Yeah.
put the phone up here, and you go click, 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 and
Yeah, they actually. I found out later they actually have 2 cameras in that room. So I thought I was
Oh,
being
hell.
sneaky, but they got a second one.
Oh, okay, thanks. That'll
But
be
I've
good
had
to know.
this problem in Egypt too,
Yeah.
and I was in the Alexandria Museum, and there is an incredible Hotep in there that is just like, it's incredibly ancient, and it's just beautiful, and I almost got thrown out of there for taking a picture of that.
Uh,
But what can you do? Something like, I'm very the reason they like to give you in Egypt too is like, you can't take photographs here, because if everybody takes photographs, then nobody will ever get to see it. Everybody be waiting for the guy in front to take the photograph, and nobody gets to see it. And I'm like, I'm the only person here. I'm the only person at this site. Why can't I? It's not flash photography. There's no colors on this. Why can't I take a picture of it? It's crazy. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
well, actually, the Valley of the Kings is open for photography now.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Whoa,
places now in
really?
Egypt you can pay a fee.
Yeah.
I had to extract my phone off a guy there the last time I was there. I literally had to grab him and say, I'm taking that back, and we can go talk to the police if you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Yeah, there's
That actually is how you have to act to these guys.
Oh, yeah.
Because the same thing happened to me at Abydos. I had a brand new, thanks to you guys, brand new Osmo. And the guy said, okay, you can film for 5 minutes. And I think I filmed for 10 minutes. And he came up to me and he said, you have to give me the camera. And I said, I'm not giving you my effing camera. And he just went, oh,
Right.
like that. Because he expected me to, $800, here,
Yeah, right.
take it away.
Yeah, it's a
No.
bluff. It's if you
I
go
got-
there, just call their bluff if you want.
Yeah.
I got tackled in the Great Pyramid because it was the first time I'd been there in a while, and I missed the sign. The guy was sitting in front of the sign that said no photography, and I thought, why can't you take a photograph in here? I took a photograph, and this guy literally ran over and grabbed my camera, and he wasn't wearing any kind of official wardrobe. He didn't have like a tag identifying himself. I literally thought this guy was trying to steal my camera, and I, like Yusuf, had to break up the situation and because I was like, this guy's trying to take my camera. I don't know who he is,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But what
getting
they
my
now
camera
have
back.
these, permissions at the
Yeah.
place. So there's for photography and for video cameras, and for the
Right.
tripod. So the last
Oh.
time I was there in June this year.
Permit.
So I went. I got my permit for the tripod. I got my permit for the camera. I got my permit for the video camera. I paid for all these permits, and I get to the boat museum, and I'm filming the granite, boat pit with these incredible granite blocks in it. And they run over like, oh my God, no video camera, you can't. I'm like, here's my permit. No video camera, no video camera. So I'm like, okay, but I'd already got it. And then I'm outside getting some shots of Menkaura, and these guys, these blue shirts, came and sort of, I'd attached a microphone. There's no microphone permit.
Oh.
You can't. I'm like, oh, but I've got like reams of permits, but there's no damn microphone permit. It's just,
Need a road permit.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
No, that is professional. No,
Yeah.
it was $39. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Just 'cause
remember
the inbound one sucks.
we had a guy on that 2013 tour get thrown out of Machu Picchu. Remember Bob? He would, for the professional gear, they tried to ejected him for having too much camera gear at Machu Picchu. He's a talented amateur, but he wasn't.
Yeah. Well, it was like a 10-year-old camera,
Yeah,
too.
just bulky, so therefore
One
it
of those
equals.
big, bulky thing.
Yeah.
When I was
professional.
there in January this year at Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, Oman, etc., and I went through and got some extra pictures and video, and they've blocked off much more stuff from when we were there in 2015. There was places that we were able to go in 2015 that were now roped off, and even in 2015 we couldn't go into the Cave of the Moon, which was that Temple of the Moon that's
Temple of the
inside
Moon.
we weren't allowed to go in there. I keep telling people go now because in a couple more years you'll be in the parking lot with a telephoto lens.
Pretty well. Almost every time there's another little rope somewhere, and
Right.
it's always the most interesting stuff. It's not the obvious stuff. It's the stuff that doesn't fit that they rope off.
Well, if you
Yeah.
notice at Puma Punku, that they've roped off that inner section, and they've got all these blocks facing inwards, so you can't see them. And that, like that left turn sign,
Oh yeah.
is now on the inside of one of those blocks in a roped off area. I had to climb over that to go take pictures of that, and I got yelled at. And I was like, "Well, I'm sorry. I'm not disrespecting the site. I'm just here to take photographs of the things that are here." And the guy didn't like it, but I'd already got the photograph.
Well, the key to do from now on is the next time you go back to Puma Punku, you go get your ticket, and then go to Puma Punku first. So if you're there between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, nobody's there.
Okay.
And so you simply, if you can speak Spanish, it's great, or if you have a guide, it's even better. But then offer them 50 soles and just say 10 minutos. And every time we've been in there, they've let us go in for 10 minutes.
That's great.
And take pictures, but they, as soon as someone comes, you have to leave, and it's like, no, 10 minutes, and then we never go beyond the 10 minutes, and that way we can film film and
The
even
detail.
measure the magnetism of the H blocks and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know I said I would keep you about an hour. I've gone a little bit over that, but yeah, very appreciative for your time, Brien.
Yeah, as always.
Yeah. Is there
Sure.
anything else you're doing in the next sort of coming up that you want to mention, or?
Sure. Actually, next month we're going back to Mexico to study the Olmec, Maya, Toltec, and Aztec. I'm going to focus on Lost Ancient High Technology because at Teotihuacan, the Temple of Quetzalcoatl appears to be a completely different construction technique using big basalt blocks. It's not like the rocks in the volcanic ash construction of the Sun Temple. So look at that. Also, Palenque has evidence not only of minor megalithic work, but also destruction. So I'm focusing my energy on that aspect of it. And hopefully I'll have enough material to write a book about it.
Cool.
Then March is Egypt, and after that we're going back to Baalbek in Lebanon.
I really want to get there one day. I've not been there. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. Luckily, with the destruction of a lot of ISIS in the Middle East, supposedly it's becoming a little safer to go to. So that'll be good. I don't know how many times I'll go back there, but you have to go at some point because the Baalbek site itself is incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
It's not just the Temple of Jupiter or whatever. There are
sitting on.
300. Well, there are 300 granite columns there that were turned on lathes. They're all busted up, but these things were at least 20 feet tall. The stone probably came from Aswan, and then also the quarry itself is about a mile away, and I think it's privately run. So you can actually climb up on top of the stone of the pregnant woman, and there's been Russian excavation there in the last year. So it's great. And then we have a Inti Raymi Inca Festival tour in June, and then Elongated Skull tour in August, and then October we're doing Peru and Bolivia, Lost Ancient High Technology, and then after that a week on Easter Island.
Wow.
So those
There's some
those are the
incredible
major things
megalithic
that-
walls out there that people
yeah.
don't seem to know about.
No, again, it's one of those. We were there with Robert Schock once, and he was pointing stuff out. He's going, look at that. That doesn't fit with that. We found at least 4 sites on Easter Island that don't fit with Polynesian-style construction whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another place I haven't been to that is on our list. We nearly got there the last time we were down there together, but
we're
it's
actually
gonna
going
happen.
to Tulum in January, and we're going to try to hop over to Uxmal as well and take a look at that site.
A few days down there.
Yeah, us too.
Cool.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Brien. It's been great seeing you again and talking to you.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
I'd love to do it again in the future.
Absolutely. And let's connect about Greece and Malta as well.
No,
I have the itinerary for Greece, and we can add Malta to that. And we can talk about that stuff for 2019.
Perfect. Were we talking about October of 2019?
Yes, I think we were somewhere.
Okay.
Late September, early October.
Yeah, and
Perfect.
Yeah.
The weather's really good right about
Good.
Yeah. A reminder for everybody else too, if you want to find more from Brien and if you're interested in these tours of his as well, hiddeninkatours.com. All the details out there.
Perfect.
All
Well,
right.
let's do this again in 6 months, not 2 years.
Yeah, for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, that's yeah.